Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Quest for Truth. Last week, we began our discussion of the end times by looking at heaven. And this week, before we get to the end, like I talked about last week, we're going to turn our focus to the other, what you could consider a holding facility, and that is hell. At death, heaven or hell awaits every person. And those who have faith and are called by God go to heaven, and those who aren't go to hell. So let's take this time to look at what hell is and what we can learn about it. So first, let's start with what the original purpose of hell is. And we see that in Matthew 25, verse 41. And it says, "Then he will also say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels.'" And so there we see that Jesus is saying that hell was actually prepared or created or made for the devil and his angels. Now, we already talked about, the devil and the angels that became demons, but a while ago, and so we don't really have to go into that too much. And if you need a refresher, you can go back and check out that video. I'm pretty sure we did one. But if we look at 2 Peter 2:4, now we're not going to actually go there, but if you look at that passage, it's talking about that there are angels that are chained in hell until judgment, and that is exactly why hell is there, for those angels that acted in ways, we're not going to get into the whole thing there, but ways that God basically put them in hell and chained them there and until judgment would come. And that also takes us into what we'll get to of hell being, again, like we talked about last week, not exactly, a little bit different, but not exactly an eternal place. So that brings us into what hell is, and it's a place of punishment. In Matthew 25, just a few verses later, verse 46, it says, "These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." And so hell is a place of punishment. Other places like Matthew 13:50, say that in hell there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and that is, because of the suffering. There's many other, places that talk about hell that are very clear that it'll be a place of torment and anguish and pain. But this passage, kind of what I said and what it says are a little bit different. So I want to talk about that for a second. So it said eternal punishment, and I kind of just said it's not exactly eternal. Well, in Revelation chapter 20, I didn't look this up, 21, I think, or 20 or 21, it talks about at the end of the millennium, and we'll definitely, we'll talk about this definitely in a few weeks from now, but hell is actually cast into the lake of fire. And so the punishment that is happening in hell, that begins in hell, will continue in the lake of fire, and sort of in hell, because hell is in the lake of fire. It's, a little, weird, but that punishment is eternal. It might not be in the exact same place. Hell is kind of like a holding facility, and then the lake of fire is the permanent place. So it's an eternal punishment. There isn't any getting out of it. The Catholics teach this idea of purgatory. It's not biblical. There's nothing in the Bible that says once you're in, you go to this place like where you can be prayed out of. You either go to heaven or hell, like I said earlier. And if you're in hell, that's the end of the matter. And sad as that may be for us to see people in that. Now, it's an interesting thing because when we think about hell, of course, like I said, it's sad to think about people that, especially people that we love being in hell. But it's also a place where justice is played out. And we're Christians who believe in Jesus don't go to hell because we are covered by the blood of Christ. He paid the price that we couldn't pay, the eternal death. He paid that so that we don't have to die and we can have life. And those who don't receive Christ's atonement, that work that he did on the cross, they have to pay that price. That is justice. That is what so many of us actually want in the scheme of things. We always cry for justice, and yet justice is really something that is almost bad for us because we are, we're sinful, like we talked about. And so hell is just. It is a just punishment. It is just, and yet God stepped in and provided a way so that we don't have to face that punishment, even though it was just. He provided a way that we can escape the punishment that is eternal, this eternal death in hell. And that takes us to our next point, sort of. Is that what hell is? It is a place of separation from God and all goodness. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 9 says, "These will pay the penalty of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power." Now, hell is a place that is absent from, like I said, all goodness, all of the but God is, in a sense, he is absent from there. And we're going to kind of try to noodle this out a little bit, but because God is omnipresent, which means he's everywhere. And if you look at Psalm 139, right, it says that no matter where I go, even if I go to the grave, Sheol, which at that point would have been including of hell, that Sheol is the kind of hell and Abraham's bosom that we talked about last week. God is there. So this hell isn't a place where he's absent entirely. It's a place where he's there, and we'll get to this a little bit more, but his wrath is there, and he is there. But what's missing is really his grace and his goodness that are shown throughout, even in this world. If we have, God's grace rains down on the righteous and the unrighteous, the sun, the rain, those kind of things, even certain blessings that come upon unrighteous people in this world. But hell is a place that is absent of the kind of how we think of the good sides of God, and it is the just side of God is what's played out. His wrath is upon them, upon the evil people, and they're dead. And hell is kind of an interesting, it's the lake of fire specifically is known as the second death. But it's almost like it's just like in the eternal kingdom that we'll get to, we're being constantly made new. It's almost as though this death is a constantly dying. You're always you are dead in the sense that you're dead, but you keep dying. You have more dying left to do. And really what that means is that, you can't, there is no way that you can connect to God. You're kind of that portion is cut off. The end, there is no hope. Like we talked about a little bit last week, that there's no hope anymore. There's no hope of God, because you're dead, and you're spiritually dead. And God's wrath is upon the evil doers who haven't been forgiven of that by the blood of Christ. So I want to take a little bit, kind of just about the rest of the time we have left, to, I think we've already done it, but I just wanted to talk about one of the common fallacies of hell. And that is that oftentimes, especially culture, but it sometimes even comes into, I've heard Christians say it at least, and it sometimes comes to the church, and that is that Satan is in charge of hell, and that he punishes people in hell. Especially when you think about someone who's really evil, like a Hitler or someone like that, you'll think, you might hear someone say, oh, well, Satan's down there, punishing him. Well, that's not at all what hell is. Like I said before, it's the wrath of God. In fact, Satan isn't even in hell at this point. He is roaming the earth, seeing who he can devour. He's wandering around, tempting mankind, trying to draw them away from God and pull them away from the work that he has even for Christians to do. And secondly, God is the sovereign ruler over hell. Everything that happens in hell has the approval of God, because it is just, like I said. And also, with that, Satan, again, even when he's thrown into the lake of fire at the end, he's not in charge. He is also a prisoner. He is being subjected to punishment just like everyone else in hell. And that's who it was designed to hold, who it was designed to punish is the Satan and his angels. But again, God is the sovereign ruler. He's everything that happens in hell is according to his justice. And that's, since we have time here, one of the other things that is kind of sad is that, well, God doesn't send people to hell. People send themselves to hell. And I understand the kind of idea behind it is that people sin, right? And then that sin is what requires the punishment. But that's not enough to say that they send themselves to hell. They still require a judge to say that they're guilty. And without saying that, it's very weak theologically and not biblically sound to say that God doesn't send them to hell. He certainly does. He does, because it's just, because they're sinners, and because they have rebelled against him, and because they have broken his law, and they deserve the just punishment of an eternal death. And he did everything that he could to save them. And so he is just. Hell is just. And God is victorious. We often live in this world where a lot of bad happens, but in the end, God is victorious, and we'll see that in the future, and he will condemn his enemies to this eternal death, the eternal just death in hell. And I'll see you next week as we get more into kind of the end times. I'll see you then.